All right, so here we go. Greetings, Earth and Space Explorers. Welcome to Doc Waller's Earth and Space Report for Friday, March 31, 2023, the last report in our third year of monthly gatherings. I'm your host, Bill Waller, an astronomer, science educator, and communicator, coming to you on a rainy but calm early spring evening in my hometown of Rockport, Massachusetts. These Earth and Space reports are intended to engage and inform people like you who are curious about Earth as a planet, who care about our life-sustaining environments, and who wonder about the greater cosmos and all that it contains. Video recordings of these reports are archived on the Earth and Space Reports YouTube channel. They are also in regular rotation on the 1623 Studios Community Access Cable Television channel. I am grateful for the continuing interest and support shown by Rockport educators and students, Cape Ann cultural colleagues, cohorts of the Gloucester Area Astronomy Club, sundry Earth and Space scientists and communicators, far-flung friends, family, and other curious folk. Thank you for your comments and encouragements. Thank you for showing up. This evening, we will be transported back to a time when indigenous peoples settled the Americas, and in doing so, bore material witness to the changing skies above. Our host is anthropologist Mary Ellen Lepionka of Gloucester, Massachusetts, who will talk on Indigenous Skywatchers on Poles Hill, Archaeoastronomy at an Ancient Observatory. Mary Ellen is an independent scholar who has been researching the indigenous history of Essex County in Massachusetts from the last ice age to around 1700 AD for a book on the subject. Some draft chapters are published at capeanhistory.org. She is a retired college instructor, textbook developer, author, and publisher with a master's degree in anthropology from Boston University and postgraduate work at the University of British Columbia. She taught cultural and physical anthropology, as well as world history at Boston University, Vancouver City College, Northeastern University, North Shore Community College, and Salem State College. She participated in salvage archaeology on Great Neck in Ipswich, Massachusetts, excavated an early Iron Age Bantu refuge site in Botswana, and conducted fieldwork in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. She also had a career in higher education publishing as a developmental editor of college textbooks. Her book, Writing and Developing Your College Textbook, has been published in a third edition and as an online course by the Text and Academic Authors Association. Articles and essays by Mary Ellen on local indigenous history appear in the Bulletin of the Massachusetts Archaeological Society, the Journal of the New England Antiquities Research Association, historicipswich.org, enduringgloucester.com, and capeannslavery.org. Some of her slide lectures can be found on YouTube as well. In 2015, Mary Ellen identified a hill site in Gloucester, Massachusetts, that appears to have served as an astronomical observatory for indigenous peoples living nearby thousands of years ago. That is the subject of her talk today. So welcome, Mary Ellen. The Zoom platform is all yours.
Thank you very much. I didn't realize that you were going to read the whole thing, or I would have sent you a shorter bio. Let me just put my screen up here. There we are.
Looks good.
Yep. So let's see, I'm just going to clean up my screen a little bit because there are a lot of faces on here.
Well, I'm going to reduce it to just you.
Thumbnails. There we are. Okay, so this talk describes the discovery and ongoing interpretation of an indigenous astronomical observatory on a hill on a peninsula known as Riverview in the city of Gloucester. And this is the site I'm talking about. It is on the coast of Massachusetts in a region of Essex County that is called Cape Ann. So this Riverview Peninsula is a terrace flanked by tidal rivers. The Anasquam River makes the Cape an island. It's fed by Mill River on the east and Little River and Jones River on the west. The area has access to the islands, woodlands, salt marshes, clam flats, harbors, and beaches of Essex Bay, Ipswich Bay, and Massachusetts Bay. Now, as you can see, this location and estuarine environment is optimal for human occupation, and there is physical evidence of occupation there dating at least to the Middle Archaic period, more than 5,000 years ago. At the time of English settlement, much later, Algonquians had an agricultural village on that peninsula with satellite camps in the surrounding coves. This geological map shows Riverview with Poles Hill marked with an X. It's called Poles Hill and sometimes Pole Hill. The hill is a plutonic outcrop of Cape Ann granite, just under 40 meters high at its highest point. Riverview is about 2.5 kilometers long, half a kilometer wide at its widest point at mid-tide, and it contains 2 ponds fed by freshwater springs and a hill with a boulder field, springs, and patches of wetland. There are thin soils and glacial till and drift that dominate the peninsula, which is flanked by salt marsh, barrier beaches, sandbars, small eskers, and a massive terminal moraine known as Dogtown. The entire tip of the peninsula, known as Wheeler's Point, is a giant shell heap. It's an accumulation of refuse from people's meals over many millennia. The colonists mined that shell heap for lime kilns. Builders later excavated it for fill to support the footings of the bridge that carries Route 128 over the Annisquam. Today, houses rest on its remains. Poles Hill is near the center of the peninsula. It was purchased by the city of Gloucester in 1999 through citizen demand to save it from development. It's public property. In the summer of 2013, I endeavored to explore it because based on ethnographic data, I knew that such a hill would have been culturally significant to any indigenous people living in and around that documented village. Their sagamores would have needed high ground to watch out for enemies coming up the river to raid their cornfields, and their shamans would have needed vantage points for watching the sky. And as you all know, sky watching is a near universal feature of the indigenous peoples of the Americas and of the ancient world in general. And I was curious to see what was there. The approaches are by Wheeler Street to Riverview Road on the north, by Ferry Street to Sunset Hill Road on the south. Historical photographs show it as a barren post-glacial terrain, treeless and strewn with boulders. The hill is bisected by one north-south aligned trail with bedrock rising sharply on either side. And this trail represents the central axis of the site. And there is also an east-west line composed of a row of boulders, a shallow trench, and a stretch of water that appears to bisect that trail at right angles, thereby resembling the cardinal directions in a medicine wheel. Directionality, if you don't know, directionality is a key feature of indigenous sites and activities in the Americas. Wigwams, villages, ceremonial gathering places such as powwow grounds, and rituals are all traditionally laid out or choreographed according to the cardinal directions. The eastern and northeastern sides of the hill have steep escarpments of exposed bedrock of Ordovician age, and these have been excoriated by retreating and advancing glaciers. And the south and southwestern sides slope more gradually to the Annisquam River. The colonists grazed small livestock there and picked the huckleberries. The huckleberries are still there, not the livestock. On my first excursion in 2013, I entered via Sunset Hill Road, climbed up a rock face on my right, and immediately came out on this ribbon of bedrock. This immediately led to this distinctive boulder, which I dubbed the Gnomon as a nickname. And I suspected right away that it had been shaped by human hand in pre-contact times and that it was positioned as a marker in some kind of astronomical array. Now, I happened to be there in mid-June near the summer solstice, so I stayed to see where the sun would set. It set over the point of the gnomon, but I could not see the rock or land feature it aligned with because of the secondary growth of trees and shrubs. And at this point, I was very excited, but I also knew that I very much needed help. I recruited Mark Carlotto to find and measure any alignments. And I recruited Nick Holland and other members of the Cape Ann Trail Stewards to clear the sight lines. I noticed right away that near the gnomon is this boulder, which is modified, and it faces true north, and it looked like it was probably once upright. And north-facing standing stones are a standard feature in sites of this kind. You have to have north in order to have any of these sites work. I also saw in the near distance some standing stones. They're shown here in two different seasons, and they seem to be leading in the direction of summer solstice sunrise, which was in fact the first alignment we found. Mark Carlotto is an engineer and an imaging expert. He published and presented jointly with me when I first reported this site. On the right is the archaeologist Tim Fole, and other members of the Massachusetts Archaeological Society helped in surveying and interpreting the site, along with a host of friends, neighbors, family members, and other interested parties over the years. And I again send many thanks to them all. We saw that the hill is shaped like a shallow over dish with a false horizon visible from the gnomon along approximately 290 degrees of rim. And astronomical objects and events could be observed on this rim. There's also a true horizon visible in the distance beyond the rim. The summit of Sunset Mountain in West Gloucester can be seen from Foles Hill, and the other view looks northwest across the Annisquam toward Ipswich Bay. The average elevation of Essex County is only around 20 feet above sea level, so all high ground would have been prime real estate for any people living there. Using satellite and Google Earth imagery, Mark predicted where sighting stones should be for the solstices and equinox, and found boulders at or near those positions. And this was followed up with 3 years of on-the-ground observations and many more years since. Still, every year, somebody sent me pictures of the sunsets and the sunrises. We first found the summer solstice sunrise sight line, which actually has two boulders. Summer solstice sunside rock is a granite boulder uniquely endowed with a lot of quartz. According to Doug Harris, who is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer of the Narragansett tribe and others, this characteristic is observed at other similar sites in New England. Quartz is associated with summer solstice sunrise. And by the way, the angles of the cuts in this rock have not been measured for possible astronomical significance. We didn't get around to it. Put that on the list of things to do. And there's the second pyramidal stone nearby, which I think people may have added to observe the summer solstice at another time as the sky changed, and more on that shortly. We next found the summer solstice sunset sightline and summer solstice sunset rock, which had been recently damaged by somebody's campfire. Indigenous people, in fact, did use fire to heat rock like granite, crystalline rock like granite, to fracture it in a controlled way. When granite is heated, you can strike off concave spalls to shake the rock. And several boulders on Pole Hill were shaped in this way, as the geologists that I consulted confirmed. The geologists included an igneous rock specialist from Boston University and a petrologist from Pennsylvania, and they had a field day examining the rocks. They told us that the boulders on Poles Hill are from Poles Hill and have always been there. They were glacial erratics dragged back and forth across the bedrock only a few centimeters at a time during each advance and retreat of the ice. It's very interesting to learn. These boulders are strongly magnetized also, which perhaps accounts for the odd sense of disorientation that visitors to the hill often report. The geologists confirmed that the boulders in the solar array were shaped by human hand and jockeyed into position, and that the gnomon was shaped by heating the base of the rock with fire and striking off large concave spalls, and that the base was further reduced to provide a layer of sand and grit on which to adjust the position or angle of the heavy boulder. They also showed us how to identify natural chemical and mechanical processes in the weathering of granite so as to distinguish natural rock from anthropogenic rocks. Acid rain can etch drip lines into granite, for example, that could be mistaken for intentional marks. The geologists proposed using thermoluminescence to date when people last used fire to strike a new surface on the gnomon. A third geological consult from Brown University suggested using palynology and sediment analysis in the water bodies up there to prove that the hill was treeless at the time the sightlines were used, and also lichenology, in which rocks can be dated by the diameter of the known growth rate of certain lichens. There's also LIDAR as an imaging tool and OSL, optically stimulated luminescence, to possibly date the last time the surface under a boulder was exposed to light. And I hope someone with research funds can follow up on some of these suggestions. So here's summer solstice sunrise on the left and sunset on the right, viewed from the gnomon. The positions are a few degrees off because of precession, the wobbling of Earth on its axis over time, and the lack of an exact alignment, like the second stone at summer sunrise, is an indication of the site's antiquity. And more on that, as we shall see. We then follow the predicted winter solstice sunrise sightline, that's an orange traffic cone up there, showing the spot. And we found the marker stones. The winter solstice sunrise sightline has a wall and a path that is not visible in other seasons. Maybe that is something that was seen after a fire that was up there recently as well. The winter solstice sunrise marker is two stacked rectangular boulders that at one time stood upright. And for unknown reasons, two stacked boulders is a characteristic at other winter sunrise sites in other Indigenous observatories in New England. And I would love to know why that is, what that's about. There's winter solstice sunrise observed from the gnomon in 2021. We later found the winter sunset sightline, but only by accident because the land slopes off to the southwest with less of a horizon and no boulders. And this chance observation, discovered in a photo by the trail steward Sandy Barry one December, shows how winter solstice sunset would have been indicated by the gnomon shadow. Around 1,000 years ago at winter sunset, the gnomon would have cast its shade on the rear of the summer sunrise stone, which is in the background. To calculate the alignments between the gnomon and these boulders, Mark used Google Earth to read the latitude, longitude, and elevation at the center point of each stone. From these measurements, he computed the azimuth angle and elevation angle of the stones from the gnomon. He used 3 different Google images to average out random errors and provide uncertainty estimates. When Mark compared the angles with known astronomical positions of the sun, however, they did not align exactly. The sun today rises about 8 degrees west of the summer solstice sunrise rock, for example. This seemed discouraging at first, but then looking at published tables showing positions of the stars in the past and correcting for precession, we found that the sight lines would have worked perfectly between 2,000 years ago and 4,000 years ago. And I hypothesized that that is when the observatory was first created and used by people here. The summer stones were placed first, and the winter stone as much as 1,000 years later. And Mark's calculations bore this out. He dated the alignments using published astronomical tables, plotting the difference between measured and predicted alignments for 3 dates: today, 2,000 years ago before the present, and 4,000 years ago. The measured alignments would have most closely matched the actual summer sunrise and sunset azimuths around 3,000 years ago, with a more recent date for the winter alignment. And you can see how Mark's use of Noah's online solar calendar to compute solar azimuth angles here, and the calculator, which corrects for atmospheric refraction, showed the greatest accuracy between 4 and 2,000 years ago. He made these rendered photorealistic sunsets with Google Earth to show the measured alignments. Notice that winter sunrise is very close to the measured alignment, whereas summer sunrise and sunset are shifted slightly from the measured alignments. And this means, again, that the winter alignments are more recent. This is supported by archaeological and ethnographic data indicating only seasonal migration to Cape Ann in the summers. Year-round habitation, making winter sky watching more relevant, did not begin in coastal Essex County until Algonquians came with domesticated corn, squash, and beans sometime after the beginning of the first millennium of the Common Era. You can see how the predictable shifting of azimuth angles over time helps to date an alignment. To these observations, we added equinox rock, an outcrop of granite bedrock due east of the Nomen and the highest point on the hill. On the right is the autumnal equinox sunrise in 2020. The schematic shows how the site worked as a solar calendar, but note that the actual dates vary from 1 to 3 days in different years. Give you a second to look at that. Mark plotted these alignments on a topographical map of Coles Hill, which also shows contour lines, elevations, and the locations of permanent bodies of water, wetlands, and tidal marsh. Mark's schematic shows the solar array with the angles and the distances between the Nomen and the marker stones. Hypothetically, the indigenous people most likely constructed the site intuitively on the basis of observed sunrise and sunset angles in relation to the cardinal directions. As I mentioned, everything begins with cardinal directions when it comes to any kind of sighting or movement. They would first have found the north direction by establishing a sight line through a reference stone somewhere in the middle of the hill in the direction of the pole star. And this reference stone is the marker that I saw originally on the first day there. It's right near the, just north of the Nomen. Next, they would have found landscape features or have placed boulders on the false horizon at the angles of the sunrise and sunset on the longest day relative to the north marker. And they then placed the Nomen at the intersection of those sight lines as a central reference point. So the Nomen is at the point where the two lines intersect, but the north-south reference line has changed over time. The stones were moved or new stones were added as needed as the sky changed over time as different stars moved through the pole position. At the time the site was constructed, The pole star was not Polaris. It was Thuban, a bright star in the constellation we call Draco. Later residents took advantage of a rock ledge to the southeast of the gnomon to position 2 stacked stones along the winter solstice sunrise direction on that day. This is just a conjecture because there are other ways that such a site could have been constructed without compasses, protractors, or advanced math. Mark calculated the margins of error and carried out a number of statistical tests to determine if the boulders and the alignments could have been the result of random placement and or selection bias. And the tests, which are replicable, strongly support the authenticity of the array as a non-random installation. For the first 3 solstice alignments to occur at random, assuming statistical independence, the probability is on the order of 1 in a billion. On the basis of Mark's math, and I confess here that I do not understand it, I am nevertheless confident that Pole Hill was modified and used by indigenous people as a calendric system. However, everything does need to be replicated. And let me just pause for a moment to review some basics for some of the people who may be watching, who may not know this, and I apologize to those who do. But anyway, the seasons are determined by changing amounts of sunlight determined by the tilt of the Earth's axis as it orbits the sun. At the start of spring, which is the vernal equinox, day and night are equal in length, each approximately 12 hours long. The sun crosses the equator going northward. It rises exactly due east and sets exactly due west. At the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the sun reaches its most northern point in the sky at noon. After a brief standstill, the days start getting shorter. Fall begins at the autumnal equinox when day and night are again equal in length. The sun crosses the equator going southward, and as in spring, it rises exactly due east and sets exactly due west. The start of winter begins with the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, when the sun reaches its most southern point in the sky at noon. And after another brief standstill, the days start getting longer. In astronomical observatories throughout the ancient world, the places on the horizon where the sun rises and sets and hesitates at the start of the 4 seasons, or however many seasons there are marked in some way by poles, stones, landscape features, or architectures of some kind. Tracking azimuths of events marking seasonal changes was essential for predicting the availability of plants and animals and directing subsistence activities, such as when to lay traps for beaver, when to plant beans, when to fish for sturgeon, when to gather sweetgrass, when to go on pilgrimage, and so on. Sky signs were also needed for conducting rituals, observing ceremonial calendars, and divining the future. So on the left, these poles are marking the sun's path at the winter solstice. The Maya astronomer from one of the codices is possibly watching a full moon or some other event on from their calendar stone. And the sun dagger calendar on the right is marking astronomical events in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. These are just some examples. This example from is an example from Guatemala. And Poles Hill is at a different latitude, so the angles are different, but the arrangement of stones is familiar. Look at their stone marked C, with its companion stone serving as the north marker. That is analogous to the gnomon on Poles Hill with its north marker, and similar principles for triangulations or sight lines apply. Now, markers for lunations on Pole Hill, moonrises and moonsets remain to be discovered. Algonquian cosmology in the Northeast describes a 3-part universe, all of them animate and filled with spiritually powerful entities. There's the sky world, the earth, and the water world below. The solar year was 13 months of 28 days based on the number of scutes on the plates or shell of a turtle. Turtle Island, as you may already know, is their representation of the earth, which was created at the bidding of a great spirit by a beaver, or in some versions by a muskrat or by a giant hare, by bringing up mud from the bottom of the water world and piling it up on the back of a turtle. Their lunar calendar was 12 lunations of 29 days, represented by the number of scoots around the rim of the turtle shell. The solar and lunar calendars were reconciled by observing at 11-day intervals. 11 days denotes the difference between the length of the solar year and the 12 lunations, and that difference can be used to predict in advance when you have to add a leap month or a 13th month in order to reconcile the solar and the lunar calendars. Somewhere on Coles Hill will be markers for observing at intervals of 11 days. And I hope someone will find them, because I cannot climb around there anymore, and certainly not at night. The names for that different indigenous peoples have for moons point to their importance in marking seasonal changes and in making a living. These are just a very few samples, mostly from northern New England. Lunar standstills, the changing positions of the planets, heliacal rising and setting of the brightest stars, and astronomical phenomena such as eclipses and meteor showers were also important. Ancient observatories may mark the appearance of Venus as the morning star, the appearance of Sirius, the angle at which the Milky Way touches the horizon, the rising and setting of the Pleiades, the rotation of Ursa Major, and more. In Algonquian belief, for example, spirits of the dead can ascend to the sky world on the Milky Way when it and its snake protector are perpendicular to the horizon. All the stars are ancestors and able to communicate with you. The whole sky is both sacred and alive. An Algonquian conception of the Big Dipper, or Ursa Major, is 3 hunters and their dog, represented by the stars in the circle, chasing the cosmic bear through the circumpolar winter sky. In some versions, they wound or kill the bear, its blood causing maple leaves to turn red in the fall. In the end, the bear, or in some versions, its cub, emerges from the den to begin the cycle again. People in northern New England and eastern Canada conducted an annual winter bear hunt and sacrifice in conjunction with these observations. This 300-year-old star chart was pricked out in birch bark by a Pawnee skywatcher on an August 13th, a significant date in the Algonquian calendar. August 13 marks the halfway point between summer solstice and the autumnal equinox, when the sun again rises and sets at the same points on the horizon. Also, the 12th and 13th of August marks the height of the Perseid meteor shower, regarded by many indigenous groups as a malevolent event. And that date also brings the setting of the Pleiades and announces the Green Corn Festival and the coming harvest. And mid-August is also the time for specially commemorating ancestors and the direction of the homelands from which they came, which most recently was from the southwest of New England. And I ask you, can you identify these stars? Here's one suggestion. Algonquian star names and constellations were not the same as those in the Greco-Roman tradition, of course, and they would have not have had the same meanings. The Pleiades, for example, in some indigenous cultures, is a band of brothers rather than 7 sisters. It's also a planter sowing seeds. It's also 5, 6, or 7 children, which varies. The number varies depending on how visible the stars are, I guess. Those children are dancing together in the sky forever. The children had floated up to the stars because all they did was party, and they had starved to death as a consequence. So the story goes. There are stories for all these stars. So these other dates were significant in the Algonquian ceremonial calendar. Venus was the communicant and protector of individuals on vision quests, for example, and they sited their bivouacs to face Venus. Poles Hill may have markers and sightlines for these other events, and I hope someone will look for them. I noticed from photographs that people send me that the integrity of Poles Hill as an archaeological site is already being compromised. Some of the boulders have been messed with. There's a cairn of stacked stones that was never part of the site. And this is in addition to the usual graffiti, crushed cans, and broken glass. In addition, Poles Hill is public land, but some of the neighbors regard it as theirs. I invited Kenneth Leonard, a noted archaeoastronomer, to walk the site, and he concurred with my assessment that it is an astronomical observatory and pointed out a lot of things that we had not noticed. He pointed out stone circles, marks cut into the bedrock that may be tally marks, vantage points for observation that he called skywatcher seats. He pointed out one that was used to observe when the tip of the handle of the Big Dipper would touch the horizon, because it was from there that those three hunters and their dog could get to the sky to begin their chase of the celestial bear. I found I needed to get a sense of the whole hill, so I enlisted the aid of drone operators using fixed wing and helicopter drones to try to grasp the site in its entirety and to identify other possible features. The aerial photographs revealed a very complex site and raised a lot of questions, and it still needs to be mapped properly using professional surveying equipment. Aside from rock sizes, distances, and azimuths, most measurements to date are based on Google Earth imaging and mathematical models. The topography and sheer number of boulders is daunting. And to give you an idea of scale, inside that circle is the gnomon and 6 men. But we were able to confirm sightlines in the aerial photos. This is the summer solstice sunrise alignment, which runs along a body of water, and this apparently is a common arrangement in other sites of this kind elsewhere in the Northeast. Again, its significance is not known. Here's the winter solstice sunrise alignment. The equinox sunrise alignment with some interesting patterns of rocks nearby that may have been intentionally positioned. Knowing that we could be looking at distortions of random depositions, we nevertheless marked possible features at sightlines to explore and then tried to locate them on the ground. Boulders associated with wetland, U-shaped enclosures, stone circles, split boulders, and stone walls with niches are features in other sites of this kind throughout New England. Several boulders appeared to be shaped by human hand, such as this head in a possible petroform of a coiled serpent. Serpent symbology is common in sites of this kind. So in addition to being an astronomical observatory, Poles Hill may also have served as a ceremonial gathering place, a ceremonial stone landscape. Here are some examples of stone features on Poles Hill, most likely indigenous in origin, that may have had cultural significance for purposes other than sky watching. Possible petroforms and classic themes for this area: whale, wood bison, horned serpent petroglyphs, and the panther. The panther on Poles Hill was at one time an upright monolith. Panther was a waterworld spirit animal present in other indigenous folklore in Asia as well as in the Western Hemisphere. It is also known as the jaguar, the cougar, mountain lion, lynx, or polecat. And there's also a possible Manitou stone that was also upright at one time. Petroforms and petroglyphs can sometimes be interpreted from ethnographic accounts and indigenous tradition keepers. But as the Sockham of the Ponkapog of the Massachusetts told me, this is Gil Solomon told me, quote, while the significance of the heavens cannot be ignored, Ascribing symbols to stones is speculation, because none of us today really knows what the creators of those landscape features meant to represent, end quote. Mark Carlotto independently attempted to map constellations to the ground at Poles Hill using the cosmological idea from the ancient world that features on the ground were constructed to mirror the night sky, as above, so below. He mapped the constellation Hercules to the coiled serpent feature on Poles Hill, for example, suggesting it could have represented the Wabanaki culture hero Gloucester. Star maps replicated on the ground have been confirmed at some ancient sites. But we don't really know enough about constellations recognized by the Algonquians of the Northeast or the people who were here before them. And there are no known instances of Gloucester being represented in the landscape. So aside from recognizing the same visible planets and brightest stars, there's no reason to think that Algonquian constellations were analogous to those of the Greeks and Romans, or for that matter, the Druids or the Egyptians. And as a scientist, I'm not convinced of a pan-human cosmology, only of astrological skywatching as a pan-human activity. Interpretations of stone structures in the Northeast have been problematic for several reasons. First, many sites have been tampered with rocks repositioned or removed. Second, post-colonial beliefs, even of archaeologists, have held that Native Americans of the Northeast built no monuments and therefore must not have been capable of them, in contrast to the scale of stoneworks evidenced in Mesoamerican civilizations. Stone structures made by Algonquians have been attributed instead to glaciers, Vikings, Celtic monks, or English colonists, not to mention aliens from outer space. Third, on the other side are knee-jerk claims of native agencies for all rock piles, along with overly creative claims as to their meaning. Fourth, abutters, historical commissions, towns, archaeologists, and tribal councils often deny the existence of such sites for a variety of reasons, ranging from not enough parking to fear of looting or desecration. The fifth problem is the sad compromising of valid scientific inquiry through the writings and practices of New Age enthusiasts who appropriate Native American concepts, customs, regalia, and places for fringe religions. And finally, and sadly, this state's historical commission has traditionally denied Indigenous agency and significance for all above ground stone structures other than rock shelters. And this is possibly a holdover from an old politics of the archives that has obscured the true history of relations between Massachusetts and the Indigenous peoples who lived here. That history included decades of state-sponsored efforts to eradicate them. So there are some handicaps and a lot of questions about researching Poles Hill as an astronomical observatory, as a ceremonial stone landscape, as a contact period refuge for the people living at Wanasquam Village, and perhaps as an artifact of a wider Indigenous macro culture or civilization in North America. And I invite others to take up the questions I've raised here, but I've gone as far as I can. And this is my email and my website in progress, and a link to our 2015 article about Poles Hill in the beginning in the bulletin of the Massachusetts Archaeological Society, which does include a full bibliography. And I thank you.
That is great. Let's get the rest of the gang here. We want the gallery, and feel free to unmute, and let's get some questions here.
Don't ask me any questions about math.
I feel bad I came late to the party, but at least I made it. That was a great lecture. And I really never knew that, you know, Gloucester, of course, had an indigenous population before the people that wind up taking over came here. But I never knew they had astronomy history. That's great.
Yeah, I thought so too. When I began my inquiry, it was because I saw Samuel de Champlain's map of Gloucester Harbor. Which I live on Gloucester Harbor, with wigwams all around it. So I went to the city hall archives and said, I'd like to see everything you have on the indigenous people who lived here. The archivist said, oh, there were no Indians here when the English settled. They had all gone away or died out. So that's what got me started.
That would have pissed them off for sure.
Yep.
That's amazing. And you really discovered quite a collection in the stones.
Yeah.
It's like a Stonehenge.
It's amazing. And of course, now I can't look at a stone without seeing something. So you have to watch out for that.
Watch out.
The downside to that.
It is sad about them denying it or losing the beauty of it because of those reasons you gave. That's a shame.
Yeah. Yep.
Got to document it. That's all.
That's all you can do. Yeah.
And let everybody know.
Right. That's my mission. Let everybody know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. This was really good sort of putting together of the stuff that has come out in the years that you've been working, and Mark Carlotto has been working with you. Just a funny story, and a question: how you settled on the name of Nomen for the center stone. There is a copy center, or there used to be. I don't know if it's still there in Harvard Square, called Nomen Copy. And one of the people who used to come on Sunday morning hikes with us frequently was Michael Gerstein, who was the original founder of CopyCop, a competitor of Nomen Copy. And so one summer when we did a hike up to Paul's Hill, we took a shot of the chief copy cop in front of the Nomen boulder.
I made copies at Nomen Copy when I lived in Cambridge, so I know what to speak.
Yeah. So how did you choose the name? What was
well, I had been looking into I just remembered it as a way of telling time using shadows. I didn't really know if the stone worked that way, but it was a central feature. So it just out of my reading in the literature, I grabbed on that term.
Like the point in a sundial, right?
Yeah, right.
It's called a gnomen.
Yeah.
One other observation of the calendar math. You didn't want any math, but I think this is tame enough. The reconciling the solar cycle. So 13 times 28 is 364, right? With 29-day lunar cycles. One calendar that does that is the Jewish calendar, which is a lunar calendar in terms of how the months work. The 15th of every month is a full moon. So Passover, Sukkot are on the 15th of their respective months, and it's always a full moon. And they keep it aligned with the solar year by inserting a leap month 7 times in a cycle of 19 years. Not sure how they got to 7 and 19. They're nice prime numbers, but that's how it works.
Very interesting. I'm just looking at. I just clicked on the chat, and I'm just looking at that. And I did have my email address on there, and I would appreciate it if there are questions, if you sent them to me via email, so that I could, make a proper answer to them. For example, I would have to check my notes to see where the other sites are in New England that are like Coles Hill, that have been authenticated. I could check my notes on that.
Can I suggest that you put your email address again into the chat?
Okay, let's see. All right. Yeah.
And maybe the URL of your website.
Or you're going to really make her type.
My website is just capeanhistory.org.
capeanhistory.org, right. Okay.
Okay, I sent it to everyone, Lepionka@comcast.net.
Beautiful.
So, and I would love to, I'd love to find out or learn from anybody watching what they have found or learned about that site, and also would be glad to answer any questions that come by there.
Good.
And as I say, my bibliography in the article has some of this information about who has written about other sites. Kenneth Leonard, Bender, what's his name, first name? There's Kreisberg. There's a whole bunch of people who have written on the subject. And there are famous books on this. Aveni, I can't think of their first names now, on indigenous star charts, and other cultures, have been more prominent in Mexico and the Southwest and in Central America and whatever. There's a lot of information on indigenous observatories. So, and thanks very much to David Tower. I look forward to receiving your paper. That will be wonderful. The trail steward for Poles Hill her name is Sandy Barry, and she is a member of the Cape Ann Trail Stewards, and she and her associates conduct tours there, walking tours there, and they always bring groups up there for the solstices and the equinoxes. So and it's easy to walk around by yourself too. It's a small area, so if you get lost, you're not lost for very long. It's quite easy to navigate.
But I caution that you should probably wear hiking boots because
Hiking boots, long pants, long sleeves. Yeah.
Because of ticks. Yeah.
the rocks can, you're going to want to go certain places, and the rocks will present challenges.
You're in our jungle.
We have a rock jungle up there.
Yeah.
And it's in season, it's very overgrown. A lot of the rocks are not even visible in the summertime.
I have just a question. Thank you. Thank you very much for the great lecture.
Thank you.
What year did you start thinking about the possibility that it was a solstice area for indigenous people?
June 2013.
Okay.
And Mark and I published in 2015, taking a couple of years to be a little bit sure of ourselves. And then and observations have been made ever since. There's I have a 3-page list of people I thank for climbing around on that hill and sending back data and so on. Hi.
So throughout the country, let's just stick with the country, maybe Canada as well. There must be a myriad of such sites.
Yes, usually the ones that survive are in land that is being conserved, on conservation land or public land or town forests or whatever. But a lot of the sites have also disappeared. I would venture, there's a site in Manchester by the Sea that used to be called Agassiz Rock. I believe they changed the name of it to the Monuments because of Louis Agassiz's reputation in eugenics. So it's called the Monuments now, but that's another site that has alignments on it. And
Manchester.
it happens to be in an area that wasn't developed, but a great many of the above ground indigenous places have been disturbed. You have to look on greenbelt property or other conservation land or municipal properties that have not been developed, and they're still there quite a lot. If you know what you're looking for, you find amazing things. If you go into the I can't now I'm having one of those things where I can't get the name. I hate that. But it's near Boxford, and it's a town forest, and there's an indigenous soapstone mine there or whatever. So if you know kind of what you're looking for, you can find it, you can see it. It's all in plain sight all around us, what little bits have managed to survive.
Both David and I have wondered whether it would be worth doing an archaeological dig up there.
No, I don't think so, because it's on bedrock. The soil is maybe 3 centimeters deep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The thing to do there would be to look, examine, like the geologist said, palynology in the water bodies, which would have sediment in them.
Oh,
And there may be some areas with sediment, but the people weren't living up there, so you wouldn't find house floors. You wouldn't find post holes for wigwams. You wouldn't find the usual things from a site.
right.
So, in fact, the chief reason that I could not get the Mass Historical Commission to come and look at it, there were 2 reasons. Because I made several efforts to try to get them to come and see it at least. But the 2 reasons, one was that they might come if we had artifacts, if there were lithic artifacts or stone artifacts.
Right.
But of course, that was not a manufactory site. They weren't striking rock there to make tools. They weren't living there. So there's no, that type of cultural debris is not in that type of site.
Mhm.
It would be very rare to find anything. The second reason that was given was there are so many rocks up there, it has to be just a random thing. And they didn't want to hear about the tests that Mark did for testing probability.
Mhm.
There are a lot of rocks up there. It's just that the idea that all of the alignments would be aligning all at the same time in such a distinctive manner is just not likely to be random at all. It would be bizarre for it to be random, actually.
And
So
the alignments were within a degree or so.
yeah.
It's fascinating that the last time that they were completely accurate, or at least the more recent ones, was 2 millennia ago, and then the earlier ones you go back 3-4 millennia, right? And then they actually line up, right?
Yes,
So
they do.
there was a question from David Tower. When do you think the last use of the observatory by indigenous people was?
The village associated with it, which the colonists called Wanasquam, and was probably Wanasquiwam, which means end of the marsh, which is what Gloucester is at the end of the Great Salt Marsh that comes down from Salisbury.
Mhm.
That village was abandoned for the last time in 1686. And I don't know if the people still used it at that time, were using it at that time, but it's likely. I found other things up there that suggested its use for leaving votive offerings in the rocks, for example, and a site of a possible sweat lodge site. Which really need to I mean, I hesitate to even mention that. It really needs to be looked into, but it very likely people went there until they left the area, so prior to 1700. And those would be just the latest. The ones that were there 3,000 years ago would have been, they would have been in the transitional archaic period between the late archaic and the early woodland period, that transitional time there. And the coastal archaic people, my understanding is they did live there year round in the rocks. But that information is coming from Brian Robinson and some of the other archaeologists who specialized in the coastal Algonquians a little bit further north.
Mhm.
See, if they carved giant granite heads, you would have gotten some attention.
That's right. You got it. Exactly. Yep. Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, even
bad.
the archaeologists neglected this area. When I first joined the Massachusetts Archaeological Society, they had all kinds of archaeological maps with all the sites, the Paleo-Indian sites, the Archaic period sites and the early and middle and late woodland sites and so on and so forth. And Cape Ann was completely blank, completely blank. So my initial idea was that we would at least get Cape Ann on the map, or, you know, Essex County on the map as having been a place where there were indigenous people.
Mhm.
But I think, you know, in Essex County was they were the first indigenous people to be contacted, along with the people on the coast of on Casco Bay, you know, on the Gulf of Maine,
Mhm.
and they were the most abused, the first to be abused, or the first to be,
Wow.
yeah. So, and there's very little information. A lot of the towns here. I had a call from the librarian in Swampscott the other day, who said that he had just found out that the colonists were not that history did not begin with the colonists in Swampscott, and could I help him? Okay, let
I
me
came
tell
here
you
for
about
astronomy.
your-
I'm getting history.
Yeah.
I
That's
heard
great.
that. I heard that the from somewhere. I'm not sure who I heard it from, but that during the time that Cape Ann was occupied only during the warm season, the people who lived there during the warm season would winter inland somewhere around Lowell or Lawrence. Is that?
That makes
This
sense.
is still up for debate, and it depended on their degree of dependence on their agriculture, because you need a 9-month occupation in order to grow corn, and squash and beans and pumpkins and tobacco and all the other things that they were growing. So the more they specialized in their domesticated crops, the more they stayed in one place. But it's just like, I mean, if you were to go to Paris for a month, your home would be empty, unoccupied, you would be elsewhere, but it's not like you had left or abandoned your home. It's just that you were doing something else then. So it was the same thing. Those villages always had somebody in them. Many people maybe would go off to set trap lines in the winter, or they would all go over to Pawtucket Falls during the spring fish run. But you know, it was like going to Lake Ossipee for your summer vacation for the month of July or something, and then you went back to the village. So there was this constant round. Also, all the people here in Eastern Mass, they were all migrating seasonally within the same 25-mile radius. So it's not like, you know, a long distance, not like the Paleo Indians going 1,000 miles to get Rama Chert up in, you know, Newfoundland or something. So whether you call them permanent, semi-permanent, or seasonal, they were here. They were
They had
here.
summer
They were
homes.
here for most of the year, if not all of it. And some people stayed in one place, and others moved. Everybody had their wigwams down on the clam flats in the summertime. Right, just above the high tide line would be all the wigwams for certain times during the summer for all the shellfishing. So, and the colonists would think that Indians or indigenous people had abandoned their village because they would find empty wigwams, but the wigwams, they just left them. They had wigwams everywhere. A single family might have 6 different wigwams in different places that they visited. They just, you know, repair them when they came to them, rather than, yeah. Oh, don't let me go on and on.
They had summer
I'm happy to go
homes.
on and on.
Interesting.
I want to ask about their use of fire. You mentioned that they might have modified some of those big rocks with fire, but also as a means of honoring the solstices and the equinoxes, particularly during sunset and sunrise. Do you think there's some credence to the idea of them lighting fires near those stones for the spectacle of it?
I don't know. I've never heard of it. I have not seen it in ethnographic literature either. Have you?
David?
Yeah, I'm just typing the spalling on the Nomen rock faces in the directions of the horizon marker rocks.
Mhm.
And the spalling that you see on the several marker rocks, that's the sunrise, the solstice sunrise rock and the solstice sunset rock are both oriented so that they could be those fires could be seen from the vantage of the Gnomon rock. I don't think that's an accident.
Well, there's a local folklore that has come down that there are mysterious fires in the rocks on Poles Hill, and it's the ghosts of the Indians doing their votive offerings by having fires in the rocks.
Hmm.
So perhaps,
So I think they had fires in season on the marker rock where the sun was rising or setting, and also around the Gnomon rock, also facing that direction.
well, do you think there would be any palynological analysis if there could be, charcoal residue in the soil?
I don't know how long those things last. I'm a high school science teacher, so my science knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep, and you'll see
Like
that.
my astronomy knowledge.
Well, one of the things that I've done is teach a lot of astronomy along the way, so I know something about that. So that would be what I would hope, is that somehow there are these residues that exist that are
measurable,
but that requires a fairly cutting edge technology. It's
Well, we'll have to
unlikely.
put that on the list of things to be done.
Yeah.
Actually, at one time, I had a whole list of assignments. And anybody who was interested, who was capable of walking up there, which I'm doing good to get around the supermarket.
Hmm.
But I would hand them a list and say, well, what would you like to do? And there would be like a picture, and I would say, find this rock and give me the GPS of it and measure it. Sometimes people would actually do that and get me back the information. But I'm ready to I'm ready to pack it in and leave it up to the next set of generations to carry on.
North. So I had a question I typed a question about the North Rock. Is that on the same side as the Gnomon, same side as Sunset Hill Road, or is it on the other side?
It's right next to the Gnomon. It's right near the Gnomon. I'm not sure if it's in its original position, but it does face north.
Okay.
And I think it was originally standing upright because it has a similar flat base like the Panther Rock that looks like it had one time been upright.
Okay. Well, next time I'm up there, I'll look at that.
Yeah.
I have in what I'm going to send you, I found evidence of a paved path.
Is that the one going up to Winter Sunrise?
No, this is but so you can look at the pictures.
Okay.
And
Well, I'm excited. Good.
so I don't know who would do such a thing. It's all fieldstone paving. It could have been anybody in the last.
Well, and the colonists did go up there. The colonists were using that site to pick huckleberries, and they had goats up there, I think, or sheep. I think it was.
Yeah. Well, look at the pictures that I've got, and there are other issues with it, and the top of it aligns with the Gnomon Rock and the equinox. So I don't know.
Lots more to do.
Lots more to do for somebody
and now that more people know about it, maybe more will get done. That will be good.
Yeah. Well, need somebody who's more knowledgeable than I am about these things.
Well, I think I'm going to leave it here with many, many thanks to Mary Ellen and
Thank you.
fabulous talk about deep history here on this rocky knoll.
I think I hope it comes across that I'm attempting to do science, or was attempting to do science, and not some other activity.
Right,
Bill,
right.
you're gonna post this recording so I can get up to the beginning I missed?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
But
that's
don't
great.
wait up tonight. I'll do it
No.
tomorrow.
Very good. Have a
Okay.
great
Very
evening,
good.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Thanks.
Catch you later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Bill.